The world is frozen now. Not the kind of cold that bites your skin and makes you curse under your breath. No, this cold devours. It crawls into your lungs, into your bones, until even your thoughts feel sluggish. Every breath feels like inhaling glass dust. The air itself has weight, pressing down, suffocating, endless. They said once that winter would pass, that this was a cycle, a correction. But that was years ago. The snow never melted. It only grew thicker, heavier, more permanent. You can't tell what month it is anymore. The sun comes up late, if at all, and even then it hangs weak and gray behind the clouds like a dying bulb flickering its last light. I remember what the world looked like before it all froze. The greens of spring, the hum of traffic, the laughter from parks and open windows. Now all of that is buried under 30 feet of ice. Cities are gone, not destroyed, but entombed. The skyline of Chicago looks like a jagged crown poking out from a glacier. New York is silent beneath frozen waves that froze mid-collapse, and stayed that way, permanent sculptures of catastrophe. The oceans themselves have stopped moving. The sound of tides has been replaced by cracking ice and the occasional distant thunder of something collapsing under its own frozen weight. The air used to smell like rain. Now it smells of nothing. Cold has no scent. Its emptiness made physical. What's left of civilization hides underground. The governments were the first to fall. Their last transmissions were pleas for calm that nobody heard over the screaming winds. After that came the silence, a total blackout. Satellites blinked out one by one until the sky was nothing but static and aurora ghosts. Power grids failed, radio towers snapped under ice, and then the world just went dark. People say there are survivor groups out there, old military bunkers, community shelters, the remnants of those climate colonies they built in the early days. Some might still be running on geothermal power or scavenged generators. But the truth is, nobody knows. The cold cuts off everything. You could have neighbors a mile away and never know they're alive. Sound doesn't travel far in this air. Even screams die quickly. There are scavengers, though, always are. They move through the snow like shadows, wrapped in layers of cloth and animal hide, sleds pulled by half-starved dogs. Some of them trade. Most of them steal. They follow the smell of burning fuel, of food, of life. You can't afford to keep fires running long. Heat means attention. Attention means death. The last remaining institution is the network, what's left of it. People like me, still broadcasting through the static, trying to reach anyone still listening. There's no central command, no order, just voices scattered across the dead frequencies. Some are live, some are recordings that loop endlessly. I once heard a woman's voice reciting the same weather report for 3 days straight. Temperatures remain below -80, she said, over and over, until her signal faded. Sometimes, if the wind is right, you catch ghost transmissions, fragments of songs or sermons or distress calls that never reached anyone in time. The world used to have rhythm, seasons, traffic, laughter, war, peace. Now it's just the slow ticking of ice forming, breaking, and reforming again. Time doesn't move forward anymore. It just drifts. Every structure that remains looks like it's been sculpted by death itself. Gas stations are entombed in frost. Cars look like tombstones with wheels, their fuel tanks frozen solid. The forests, the few that still stand, are skeletal, white and brittle, snapping in the wind like bones. The animals that remain have changed. They move slower, hunt less, and their eyes glow in the dark like shards of ice reflecting distant starlight. The wind never stops. It's a constant howl, sometimes soft, sometimes screaming, always there, as if the planet itself is mourning what it lost. Sometimes at night, I can't tell if it's the wind I'm hearing or someone crying out in the distance. You learn not to check anymore. We used to measure temperature in numbers, degrees, charts, graphs. Now we measure it in pain. How long before your fingers stop working? How many minutes before breath freezes in your beard? How many hours before your batteries die? That's the new metric of life, time before the cold winds. There are rumors that the world to the south is warmer, that beyond the mountains the frost hasn't reached yet. But I've seen the maps. The warmth ended long ago. The planet's circulation collapsed. The ocean stopped moving, the jet streams broke apart, and now the world is locked in place. No thaw, no summer, no relief. What's left of humanity exists in pockets, a few hundred here, a dozen there. They trade in food, fuel, and faith. Hope has become the most expensive currency of all. Some say the ice will recede when the planet stabilizes. Others think this is the stabilization, the new normal. I don't know which is worse, believing the world will never recover, or believing that it still might. When I look out from my shelter, what used to be a radio station, I can see the remains of the city buried under ice. The antenna still stands, leaning, half collapsed, its tip coated in frost so thick it looks carved from crystal. Every night I crank the generator and send out a signal. It's weak, but it's something. So if you're listening, if there's anyone left out there, this is Station Zero, broadcasting from the frozen heart of what used to be civilization. You're listening to the radio during the longest winter the world has ever known. They used to call me 1,000 things: technician, DJ, volunteer, fool. Now they call me a voice. I am the voice that lives inside this rusted transmitter, the one that cuts into the silence when the generator will let it, the one that tries to stitch a few ragged human threads together so we don't fray apart entirely. My name is Jonah Rays. I was a sound engineer before the winter that never ended. I fixed mixers and tuned microphones for people who wanted their message to sound like a promise. The machines always obeyed me once. People, not so much. I had a life that filled seasons. A small apartment with sunlight on the kitchen table, a woman who laughed too loud for the space, a daughter who drew suns on every scrap of paper she could find. That life is not gone so much as it is pressed into a photograph. Edges curled, colors dimmed, something you don't look at unless you are willing to start crying. I survive the way anybody surviving this long does, with stubbornness and compromise. My shelter is the skeleton of an old radio station. The studio sits below street level, insulated by its own history. Above, the city is a sculpture of ice. Below, it's a room of wires and humming metal, and the smell of oil and warmed plastic. I sleep in a cot behind the soundboard, wrapped in layers I stole from the uniforms of men who no longer needed them. I patch holes in the roof with tarps and the pages of a Bible I couldn't bear to burn. The generator is set in an old delivery van outside, its exhaust venting into a chimney I built from scavenged ductwork. Every morning I coax it awake, whispering like you would to a cat. Fuel is the thin line between us and nothing. I ration it like prayer. Small burns for warmth, longer burns when the frost eats at the bearings and the copper wires complain. I have an ice melter, a jury-rigged loop of copper, and a hand pump that drips melted snow into a bucket over a charcoal filter. It's crude. It tastes of metal and hope. Water is an arithmetic problem. Minutes until hands lose feeling, degrees until the filter clogs, how many mouths to feed. Food comes from caches I map and revisit, and from trade. I barter radio hours for canned goods. Baby formula I keep for nights when a child's cry breaks my sleep. I know how to make a heater from old radiators. I can splice a power cable with 2 strands of copper from a downed transformer and a prayer. I know how to keep batteries warm inside my sleeping bag, pressed to a chest that doesn't have the courage to shut down. Because batteries are not just energy, they are memory. They hold recordings. A lullaby my daughter hummed 6 winters ago, an answering machine message from my wife that repeats the weather report before the line went dead. I keep those files like relics. Mostly, I keep the signal alive. I learned the dance of frequencies the way other people learn to tie shoes, muscle memory, superstition. You rotate the knobs, count the clicks, lean into the crackle and coax a human tenor out of static. When the generator coughs, I speak slower. When the wind is particularly sharp, I use a lower register so my voice doesn't shatter. I broadcast notices, where we found fuel, a warning about thin ice, a request for parts. But I also broadcast stories. People need more than coordinates and bartered goods. They need to be heard. Why do I keep going? Duty is the polite lie I tell myself. The truth is smaller and stranger. I keep going because someone once kept going for me. In the first months, when the world was unraveling and I thought the weight was too much, an old broadcaster in a neighboring bunker sent out a recording that said, "If you have a voice, use it. If you have hands, help." I don't know who he was. I only know his voice cut through my paralysis and made me put my hand to a mic. After that, I couldn't stop. There is also responsibility. Being a voice made me a ledger keeper for the living. People call in to register names, births, deaths, locations, and I keep them in a logbook. It is a small, stubborn version of history. The world lost governments, but we still need records. They trust me to remember. That trust is a kind of oxygen, and there is the ache. The ache is the old life and the weight of absence. My daughter's laugh is a pressure behind my ribs. I press my palms there some nights until it dulls. I keep pieces of her, a mitten, a sticker, a photograph half covered in salt. I talk to them sometimes on air, not because I think she'll hear. The girl is gone, swallowed by the first blizzard that came like an accusation, but because naming her keeps her present in the room, a warm thing in a cold place. There are nights when I wake and the cot is empty, and I have to remind myself that it's always been empty since the snow took her. It's a ritual of grief dressed as survival. People in this world have degrees of cruelty and grace in equal measure. I've been robbed more times than I can count, and twice I was asked to turn my broadcast over to a man who wanted to use my frequency to sell protection he could not afford to give. I refused. The choice cost me a shipment of fuel. The choice taught me that survival is ugly. Sometimes you must trade your ethics for a can of beans, and sometimes you must stand on a principle and watch the lights dim. Trust is currency. I choose it sparingly. I trust the mechanics who replaced my generator's carburetor with a part from an ambulance because their hands smelled like oil and children. I distrust men whose smiles are too wide and whose eyes are hungry. But trust is a risk I take for the sound of another voice at night. We trade. I give airtime, they give news. Once in a while someone walks into the studio, a face like a map of winters, and we sit without talking for an hour, listening to each other's breathing. Those visits are rare and holy. The body ages fast here. My fingers suffer frostburn that never fully heals. My joints remember cold in a way that rainfall had never taught them. I have nightmares. Corridors of frozen radios, the lights flickering, my daughter reaching from the static and turning to ice. My health is a ledger too. Tips of toes numb, an infection in a thumb that I lanced myself because there was no doctor. The pain is a tutor. It sharpens decisions. Yet there is stubbornness, an economy of hope. I plant a seed of hope by saving 1 hour of broadcasting for a story that isn't about survival logistics, a memory of a summer, a joke, a song. When I play a song and someone calls in to say it made them cry, I realize that I am not just preserving life in the grid of generators and fuel. I am preserving the reason to survive. If there is a mission, it is simple. Keep the line open. Keep a written record. Keep the little kindnesses alive. It sounds like a small thing, radio in a frozen world, but it's bigger than my body. I am a lighthouse for people who have lost maps. I throw signal like a rope. When the wind piles snow against the van and the generator chokes, I stand with a spade and punch a hole through white that smells like sulfur and old news. I am a technician and a priest. I am a thief and a father, and occasionally, a liar. I will tell you the coordinates for fuel caches I know are empty because sometimes hope needs to be fed with myth until the real thing surfaces. I do what I must, so I broadcast, I tell the weather, I tell the names. I tell the stories that fit in the pockets between urgency and despair. I remember laughter, and in remembering, I teach myself to keep going. If anyone out there listens, I am here. My hands are tired, but my voice still works. The winter that killed most of the maps began like a rumor, odd weather reports, shipping delays, a string of failed summers. Then it accelerated until the seasons unraveled like a frayed rope. One year the corn failed. The next year the ocean started to hiss in places they'd never hissed before. After that, the air and the water stopped agreeing on how the world should be dressed. We call it the freeze because it's the easiest word to say under a thin oxygen mask. But calling it a freeze makes it sound like a single event, like something you can wait out. It isn't that. It's a rolling, compounding collapse, a dozen failures braided together. The jet stream went queer and started sluicing cold air out of the poles like a faucet left open. Ocean currents that used to ferry heat around the globe stalled. Wildfire smoke and industrial soot injected into the atmosphere created a dimming that reduced sunlight. And when the sun dimmed, the whole planet leaned toward the poles. Permafrost thawed in strange pockets while other places iced over. Methane belched from long frozen traps, then froze into the air and added to the strangeness. The result is a climate no one wrote a manual for. It's not dramatic in the cinematic way people imagine. There were no single-moment flashpoints, no exploding satellite, no one event that announced the end. Instead, it was a decade of small betrayals. Crops that wouldn't set seed, the shipping lane that closed permanently, the city's heating grid that hiccuped and then went dark for good. Then the storms changed. Snow came earlier and never left. Blizzards became a season of their own, not a weather event but an institution, with its own rules and casualties. My immediate crisis is simple and brutal. Heat, water, and power are disappearing faster than I can store them. Food caches rot in cold that cracks their cans. The generator takes more and more fuel to coax a hollow warmth into the studio, and each liter burned is a promise I might not be able to keep tomorrow. The hand pump that melts snow works, but the copper coils ice over if I don't tend them every hour. Batteries lose half their charge in cold that would only be a monthly annoyance before the freeze. Radios that used to sense the city's heart now search dead frequencies and come up empty more often than not. People are getting desperate. Desperation bends morals like metal. I've had 2 different survivor groups demand airtime to sell protection, to rally men with guns. One wanted me to read a manifesto that promised safe passage to a place that didn't exist. The other group offered protective escorts in exchange for my generator parts. Both wanted something I couldn't honestly provide. I refused both times. I paid in food and a week's worth of fuel. That's the calculus now. Values converted into calories. Encounters with other survivors fall into crude categories. The ones who barter, the ones who beg, and the ones who take. Barter is the polite economy, a can of peaches for an hour of broadcast, a handful of antifreeze for a spool of wire. Begging is frequent and humiliating, faces hollow with frost, voices thin as scraped metal. Taking is violent and quick. Raiders, we call them ice wolves, move in packs, fast and efficient. They're not interested in your ethics. They want what keeps you alive. Their leader once told me without irony that the world had simplified. Only the hungry and the clever survived. He had children under his coat and a rifle that ate leftovers. There are other collections of people, too. Technologists in basements who hoard salvaged solar panels and call themselves the Registry, a school-turned-shelter where women keep watch in shifts for the night raiders. Alliances form and break with the weather. Weather is the most honest enemy. A storm can arrive without warning and erase everything you built in a week, tarps, caches, rations, and leave only the white monotone where your life used to be. Thin ice is a lie we learn to stop trusting. What looks like solid ground is often a brittle crust over a hollowed street or the frozen roof of a car. Visibility drops to nothing in minutes. Once, on a supply run, I followed an old GPS waypoint to what should have been a grocery's back door, and instead found a collapsed awning and a sinkhole that had swallowed a whole block. There's a map in my head now of places to avoid because winter rearranged the city itself. Survival gets harder every day because the baseline resources are shrinking, and the costs of using them rise faster than supply. Fuel is the clearest example. A single generator hour once bought coffee for a dozen. Now it keeps a handful of lights on, and the transmitter warm for an hour and a half. When a generator burns, it warms the immediate air but also signals everything living nearby. The smell of exhaust travels. Heat equals noise equals attention, and attention brings trade and sometimes trouble. So you choose between freezing quietly and burning boldly. Neither is a winning strategy. Water is another arithmetic problem. Snow melt is abundant but energy expensive. Every drop requires heat and filtration. I've learned to prioritize. Drinking and generator cooling take precedence over cooking. That means meals are often dry and brittle. Jerky, canned beans, compressed biscuits. Food is a logistics war. Canned goods are heavy. Dehydration lightens loads, but you need water to reconstitute. Gardens are a dream for those with geothermal wells and amber houses. Insulated rooms with lamp arrays that mimic sunlight. But such luxuries are for collectivized groups or the lucky few who found functioning infrastructure below ground. Most of us forage, trade, and raid. Mechanics fail because cold magnifies entropy. Metal contracts and snaps, lubricants congeal, seals that would hold in summer become brittle. Even the simplest device becomes a complex choreography of warm hands, improvisation, and patience. I've learned to think like a machine. Preheat bearings with hot water before applying torque. Store batteries next to my body. Tape the drains on fuel lines to delay freezing. It's all improvisation against a clock. How long before frost eats the seals? How long before the next storm? How many spare parts do I have left? There's a scientific explanation I sometimes give on air when people call and ask why this is happening. I don't pretend to be a climatologist. I used to tune microphones, not model atmospheres, but the broad contours make sense even without equations. The polar regions warmed faster than expected, which altered the temperature gradient between equator and pole. The jet stream that used to stay high and fast began to oscillate and sputter. Those waves let Arctic air spill south and shut off the warm conveyor belts that once carried mild weather. At the same time, soot from fires and industrial collapse darkened the ice in places, changing its reflectivity and letting it hold more heat in some spots while throwing cold in others. Ocean currents, the great conveyor belts, started to slow as freshwater from melting ice diluted the salinity that drives thermohaline circulation. When the currents slow, heat transport falters and climates that relied on steady oceanic warmth learn to be brittle. It's a complicated feedback loop. Less sun reaching the surface from aerosols cools things, but permafrost melt releases greenhouse gases that try to warm things in other ways. The net result is chaotic, and chaos is a weather system that likes extremes. When I explain that, I hear a silence on the line that could be shame or relief. People want to know there is a reason. They want to pin the chaos to a cause so they can, in their heads, build a solution. Fixing jet streams and ocean salinity is not a home repair job. It's beyond us. So we focus on what is local and immediate. Actionable advice is the only medicine I have between broadcasts. For anyone who still remembers how to read the sky, never travel alone in a storm. Tie marker flags along your route if you must go out. Colored cloth tied to short poles will remain visible longer than footprints. Carry a crude compass and mark rendezvous points before you leave. Keep your batteries warm by insulating them against your body or a warm water bottle. Chemical hand warmers will buy you hours. Conserve fuel by using a black painted barrel as a solar preheater when the weak sun shows itself. Even dim light can pre-warm water if channeled into a dark container in a reflective box. Melting snow in batches rather than continuously reduces heat loss. When you must burn, burn long and slow rather than short and fierce. It's more efficient. Recycle heat. Duct the generator's exhaust through a simple heat exchanger to pre-warm intake air for the studio. And stock the obvious. Spare spark plugs, gaskets, rubber seals. Things that seem cheap in normal times are priceless now. But actionable advice stops where human psychology begins. People hoard because scarcity is a terror reflex. Hoarding makes neighbors' desperation worse, and that desperation breeds predation. It's why keeping broadcast channels open matters. Information reduces wasteful duplication. If 3 groups know about a fuel drop and coordinate, they share the burden. If everyone acts alone, they hoard in empty caches and leave nothing for the next passing soul. The social catastrophe is layered. Institutions collapsed because their supply lines did. Hospitals closed because their heaters failed. The chronic died in small numbers that added up into an avalanche of grief. Governments as we knew them, legislatures, courts, stopped functioning because their communication lines severed. There's no coherent national response anymore, only localism, county pockets, neighborhood militias, faith communities that run by candlelight. Some groups try to reconstitute governance, committees that ration fuel or adjudicate raids, but these systems are fragile. A single successful incursion, a single betrayal breaks trust, and with it the system. The human cost is granular and persistent. Kids born in the freeze learn a cold vocabulary. They know the taste of metal water. They never learn the shape of a summer day. Old memories are passports into private grief. Names, songs, recipes. Most days, people use those ghosts as currency. Trade a memory for a can of peaches. Barter a lullaby for a bulb. I do it myself. I sell an hour of a summer story for a strip of fabric to patch the van. It's not noble, it's necessary. The immediate crisis is that the next storm is always the one you didn't prepare for. Lay plans too long and you waste fuel prepping for a storm that doesn't come. Fail to plan, and a surprise whiteout can erase your caches and your people. The city is a chessboard where half the squares are missing now. Each move is risk. So I broadcast warnings, a weather watch for the east sector, a note that the route to the registry is treacherous, a mention that the little school on Halsted has spare blankets but needs wire for its antenna. There's one more danger that makes the rest feel cruelly insignificant, hope misapplied. Rumors of the South, a place warmer, greener circulate like a virus. People pack up and walk, following half maps drawn in desperation, and sometimes they never return. Others exploit those rumors. Men with trucks will promise you passage in exchange for everything you own. Sometimes they keep their word, sometimes they don't. Hope can be sustenance, or it can be bait. The crisis is not just freezing temperatures and failing infrastructure. It's the erosion of trust, the collapse of predictable rhythms, the way human systems, hospitals, schools, governments, that used to smooth the edges of catastrophe are gone. That's why my tiny station matters. Not because I have the power to thaw the planet, but because a line of voice can keep people from walking toward false suns. Every day I pencil in the same list. Check generator oil, rotate the battery cache, confirm the water loop, make one human contact that isn't transactional. The list is both logistics and prayer. My crisis is the daily question of whether the sum of small actions will add up to survival. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, when a caller gets through and tells me that a neighbor used one of my tips to save a child's frostbitten hand, I believe for a shallow hour that the arithmetic will work out in our favor. The last week has been the coldest I can remember. The thermometer outside the broadcast window shattered 2 nights ago, not from impact, but from the glass contracting faster than its frame. The mercury froze in place, a perfect silver vein caught mid-breath. That's how I know we've passed the point of ordinary winter. Whatever is happening out there now isn't seasonal. It's something else, a new era trying to write itself on our bones. The generator coughs more than it hums. I've stripped it twice, scavenged spark plugs from an abandoned snow tractor, and used motor oil that smells faintly of gasoline. It works but barely. I ration every drop of fuel like it's a secret. 1 can a day. Enough to power the transmitter, the shortwave receiver, and the single bulb that keeps the frost from swallowing my breath when I record. The rest of the time, I sit in darkness lit only by the slow glow of embers and the red flicker of the battery light. Food's gone thin. The canned stockpile is down to 5 tins, beans, meat paste, condensed milk, a few biscuits sealed in old foil. I trade radio time for supplies when I can, but trade's drying up. The routes are too dangerous. Ice wolves, scavenger gangs, whatever you want to call them, they've started targeting radio operators. We're worth more dead than alive. Our transmitters stripped and repurposed as signal jammers or false beacons. I can't count how many times I've intercepted fake distress calls. Some are so well crafted they sound real. A trembling voice, a broken transmission, coordinates that almost make sense. I've learned not to answer. Every signal could be a trap. 2 nights ago, the traps turned physical. It started with the dogs. Not mine, there are no dogs anymore, not in this city. But I heard barking echoing across the empty streets. Barking and laughter. Then metal scraping metal, a slow rhythmic sound. When I cut the generator and peered through the frost-layered window, I saw them, 4 shapes moving with purpose, flashlights bobbing like will-o-wisps. Raiders. They were dragging a sled behind them, something large and covered in tarp. They stopped near the old post office, maybe 30 meters from the station, and started unloading. I couldn't see what they were moving, but I heard the hiss of fuel and the click of a lighter. They were setting a fire. I almost ran outside, not to stop them, but to stop the fire from spreading to the old wires that snake beneath the street. If those wires go, I lose my power relay, the one thing that lets me broadcast on multiple frequencies. But then I realized that's exactly what they wanted. Fire draws attention, and where there's light, there's warmth. And where there's warmth, there's life, so I waited. The blaze didn't spread far. The snow was too dense. But in the orange glow, I saw what they had brought, a body. Not dead, bound, gagged, and barely moving. They left it by the fire and disappeared into the storm. I waited another hour before I moved. When I reached the body, I saw a young woman, face frostbitten, eyes wide with shock. She'd been beaten, stripped of her coat, left as bait. I carried her back to the studio, wrapped her in the spare thermal sheet, and waited for her to wake. When she did, she screamed so hard I thought she'd tear her throat. She didn't stop until I showed her the transmitter. The moment she realized I wasn't one of them, her voice broke into sobs. Her name was Mara. She said she came from a community north of the lake, a place that still had running water and solar heat. They called it the Green Line, supposedly built on an old hydroelectric plant that somehow still worked. According to her, they'd restored part of the grid and were gathering survivors to rebuild. A city that breathes again, she said, her eyes glazed with fever. It sounded like a myth. I've heard 100 like it. But this one, something about the way she described it felt different. Details too precise to be invented. The layout of the dam, the number of turbines still operational, the type of battery banks they used. Either she was a brilliant liar or she'd really seen it. I should have dismissed it, but hope is an infection, and I've never been good at staying immune. The storm that followed pinned us inside for 3 days. During that time, Mara told me her story in fragments. She'd been part of the Green Line's engineering crew, maintaining the dam and filtration systems. A week ago, one of their patrols went missing. When they sent her team to investigate, they found signs of sabotage, melted tracks near the intake valves, scorch marks that shouldn't exist in the cold. Before they could return, they were ambushed by raiders. Her crew was taken. She barely escaped. Someone doesn't want the dam working, she told me. Someone's hunting for the people who know how to keep it alive. It was more than paranoia. I've intercepted strange signals lately, encrypted bursts of static that don't match civilian transmission codes. Military-grade compression. Someone out there is still transmitting in patterns that don't belong to any of the survivor bands. That night Mara decoded one. The message repeated a single phrase in an old NATO cipher. Water source SECURED, do not engage. She stared at the receiver like she was seeing a ghost. That's them, she whispered. That's the green line. Or what's left of it. I didn't know whether to believe her, but I wanted to. Day 5 after her arrival, supplies at half. The storm's getting worse, snow falling in sheets, wind like knives. The roof vibrates with each gust. The sound reminds me of a ship hull under pressure. My bones hum with it. Mara insists we should leave. You can't stay here, she said this morning. They'll track the radio. They always do. If they've heard you, they'll come. She's right, but this station is the last piece of civilization I know how to keep alive. Without it, the survivors who still listen, the truckers, the scavengers, the refugees, lose their compass. The signal keeps them connected, even if only by thread. Leaving would mean silence, but staying could mean death. The internal struggle eats at me in every quiet moment. I've built my identity on the idea of communication, on keeping the world talking, no matter how broken it gets. But maybe communication itself is the trap now. Every broadcast is a flare in the darkness. Every word is a location. Mara watches me work with suspicion. She's seen too many false broadcasters. She says, people who lure others in with messages of safety, only to strip them for fuel and food. I can't blame her for doubting me, but sometimes, when she thinks I'm not looking, I see her trace her fingers over the radio console, like she's remembering what it feels like to believe in something. 2 nights ago, I caught her trying to dismantle the backup transmitter. She said she wanted to repurpose the parts for a beacon, a short-range distress call to the green line. I told her it was suicide. The signal could attract raiders instead. She didn't care. We can't stay frozen in this hole forever, she said. You broadcast to ghosts. I want to talk to the living. There was a truth in that I couldn't ignore. The next morning, we detected movement near the perimeter sensors, faint vibrations, measured and rhythmic. Not a storm, not random, human. I killed the lights, cut the generator, and grabbed the rifle. 4 shapes again. Same pattern, same distance. But this time they weren't dragging a sled. They were scanning with thermal lenses. I could see the faint blue glow of the sensors sweeping across the street. They found us, Mara whispered. We hid in the crawlspace under the studio floor while the raiders searched the area. One of them climbed the stairs and kicked open the door. Boots crunched on frost. I could hear their breath, slow, steady, mechanical. Then the unmistakable click of a radio headset. They weren't just scavengers. They were organized. Military trained, maybe. Minutes stretched into hours before they left. We stayed hidden until dawn. When we finally emerged, the air outside smelled like melted plastic and fuel. They'd burned the generator shed. My power was gone. That was the breaking point. Mara looked at me with hollow eyes and said, "They'll come back. And next time they won't leave." So now we're packing. 1 transmitter, 1 battery, enough rations for a week. The road north is long, but the signal I caught this morning changed everything. A weak broadcast at 42.6 megahertz, repeating the same words over and over. The water still flows. North Dam. Repeat. The water still flows. The voice was faint, distorted, but real. Maybe it's just another trap. Maybe it's the truth. I can't tell anymore. But the thought of it, the possibility that somewhere water still moves, turbines still turn, and light still burns against the dark, is enough to make me step into the cold again. The radio hums with static as I prepare the last transmission before we leave. If you can hear this, this is Station ES signing off. Heading north. Following the flow. If there's still a world that works, we'll find it. Hold the signal. Don't give up. The words feel too small for what's coming, but they're all I have. As I turn the dial down and silence takes hold, I feel it, the pull of something greater than fear. Maybe hope isn't rational. Maybe it's just the body's way of refusing extinction. Either way, the road calls, and the snow is waiting. They called it the green line like it was a storybook, a neat name for a messy thing. By the time we crested the last ridge of the frozen spillway and saw the dam, Everything in me had narrowed to a single, private calculation: water or no water. The turbines crouched at the base of the concrete like sleeping beasts, their housings rimed with ice. A thin steam drifted off the intake, a hint of heat where heat shouldn't be. For the first time in months, my hands and feet stopped registering the cold. The place looked like someone had glued civilization back together with duct tape and prayer. Solar panels leaned on scaffolds like rows of black leaves. A ring of buildings, workshop, barracks, control room, were huddled behind sandbags and welded shutters. People moved like a colony of pale ants, thick coats making them anonymous. Children ran in wool caps. Someone shouted and laughed, and the sound landed foolish and miraculous in my chest. Mara walked ahead of me, her face odd and soft with relief. "We made it," she said, the words simple enough to break a man. I had not let myself imagine this. I had not let myself believe in destinations. I had tightened my jaw against it, kept my mind busy with the mechanical things that kept us alive: pumps, gaskets, fuel math. Standing there, I felt like a man listening to a bird call and realizing birds still existed. The reception was cold. We were met by two men with rifles and a woman whose eyes did not smile but measured. They searched us, took the battery and the one remaining vial of fuel we'd carried as an offering. Then they escorted us into the control room. Control rooms are always smaller than you think. Ours at the old station had felt spacious. This one was a cramped maze of panels and analog gauges that still spun. A humming filled the room, not ominous, not yet like the low purr of an animal about to wake. A man in a threadbare jacket introduced himself as Cade, the engineer. He spoke with the bluntness of someone who had had to make difficult decisions for survival. Behind him, the main monitor flickered with numbers: flow rate, intake temperature, turbine RPM, a live graph of output. "We lost 2 turbines to ice last month," Cade said without preamble. "The other 2 are holding. We divert most of the flow for filtration and warmth, enough for the camp, not enough for everyone who shows up." A woman near the back, a teacher, judging by the way the children clustered at her knees, added, "We ration by need and contribution. If you can fix things, you earn more than bread." Mara's voice softened. "Cade, this is Jonah. He's a broadcaster. He keeps people connected." Cade's eyes flicked in my direction like a light searching a room. "Broadcasts attract people," he said. "We've had mercs take that path. Folks die for hope. Why should we risk the place for a radio show?" His question sat in the room like frost. It had been the same question in my head since Mara told me about the green line. The truth is that I'd never known how valuable a voice could be until the voice became the only bridge between strangers. But Cade's question was not rhetorical. The green line protected its water like it was a secret weapon, which it was. If word got out that the turbines were still spinning, the routes would fill with hopeful, desperate feet, and the raiders would follow, like they always did. Then the first blast hit. It was at noon. We were in the small courtyard, crowding around a steamer where the cook staged a thin soup. A sound split the air, an impact, then a concussion of metal folding. The guard bells went up. People scattered like birds. Someone shouted, "Raiders North Access." We ran like everyone else. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I should have heard the engines, that some tiny radio in my head would have caught the signal. The old technician's superstition that sound precedes catastrophe. But the raiders had been clever. They came from below the ice, a thermal cutter slicing a lift shaft open, then a cascade of men in melt-smudged parkas. They were organized, fast, and lethal. They had drones with thermal hounds, and someone in their command spoke with a clipped, metallic voice over a looping speaker. "Drop your weapons, move clear. Water is ours." Cade barked orders. They were competent, but not enough. The raiders hit the filtration outbuildings first, smashing pumps and slitting hoses. One of their men carried a crate marked with a symbol I recognized from the earlier encrypted bursts, the same group that had warned, "Do not engage." They'd come to claim their prize. I watched a boy, maybe 10, try to clear a frozen valve and get pushed aside by a raider wearing a mask that made his laughter sound like a machine noise. Mara did not hesitate. She sprinted into the chaos, shoved a raider off the valve and wrenched the handle. Water sputtered out in a hard, triumphant jet. The pilot light of survival flared within me. Then the radio in the raider's hand squawked a single word that could have been an order or a death sentence. Focus. I did not think. I did not weigh options in that metallic arithmetic I had used for years. I moved toward the broadcast van parked behind the control room, a rusted vehicle that once housed a missionary group's mobile transmitter. It was not ours. It was not protected. But if the raiders wanted the turbines, they would want to sever communications. And if they severed communications, rumors would scramble into the white world like locusts. I remember the smell, ozone, hot oil, burning insulation. I remember the way my hands shook when I grabbed the transmitter handle. I remember the tiny, ridiculous thought that this one box and my voice could still buy us time. Cade saw what I was doing. He shouted something about priorities, about not becoming bait. Mara grabbed my sleeve hard. "Jonah," she hissed, "if you do that, you'll draw them right to us." "If I don't," I said, more calmly than I felt, "they'll take the dam and leave no one to sing to." There is a place where ethical calculus goes from hypothetical to blood on your knuckles. Standing over that rusted amplifier, I felt the full weight of it. The van's engine was a dead thing, but the transmitter could be powered from the turbine feed for a moment. I could broadcast a message, not a beacon for help, but a trick. Years ago in the old city, I learned the art of false presence. Loop a sample, set it to repeat, make the signal sound like a nearby convoy. You could make a whole squadron sound like an army. In a world of hunger and cold, the illusion of greater force is a currency almost as good as canned food. I could fake an incoming relief column, lure raiders to a false engagement, and maybe they'd move away from the turbines. Or the illusion could call more of them. Radio is a double-edged blade. Cade shouted into his headset that we needed to seal the intake before they could reverse surge the turbines. But to do that, someone had to run to the valve house, a narrow crawl full of rust and ice. I volunteered, and no one argued. It was the easiest moral choice in that moment. Action, not words. But when I reached the valve house, I found two raiders already working a lever. One of them saw me and raised his weapon. The room narrowed down to the bright muzzle flash and the taste of copper in my mouth. I lunged, slipped on oil, and the world went very small, the size of a fist in a heartbeat. I don't remember the exact sequence of the next 10 minutes. I remember blood on my knuckles, the taste of iron, the sound of Mara's shout, and then the monstrous, disorienting silence when a drone dropped its searchlight. We fought not like trained soldiers, but like men who had been forged into desperation. In the end, the raiders retreated, not because we'd won, but because a thunder of engines rolled over the ridge. I had expected the worst. Instead, a convoy of old trucks rolled in, flags flapping, headlights cutting through the haze. They were the registry, the same group that hoarded panels and called themselves custodians of tech. Their commander barked orders and their drones blinked red and blue, projecting an authority that made some raiders hesitate and then scurry away. Cade and I collapsed, huffing and bleeding into the snow. Mara knelt beside a torn child and wrapped a scarf around him. The registry set up a perimeter, and slowly the camp began to stitch itself back together. For a while, I thought we'd been saved by coincidence. Later, as men with bandages and blankets moved through the damaged outbuildings, Cade came to the control room and looked at the rack of gauges. He turned to me and said, "Who are you really?" His voice was softer than before. I thought then of the night I first took the microphone and how an anonymous voice in the dark had told me to use what I had. I thought of my daughter and the photograph curled in my pocket. I thought of the times I'd traded an hour of summer memory for a tin of condensed milk. All these small mercies had led to this, a moment where a broadcast could change the fate of a community. "I'm the man who speaks," I said. It felt like the truth and like an understatement. The commander of the registry, A woman with eyes like flint asked me to record a message. She wanted something strong, something that would travel and convince others that the green line was defended. We patched the old van's transmitter into the dam's power grid for a few minutes, and I spoke. I could have yelled territorial warnings. I could have advertised the turbines like a prize. Instead, I chose a different voice. The voice I'd learned in the empty studio, the one that softened in the dark. I spoke of limits and rules. I spoke of contributions and of trade. I admitted our vulnerability and our readiness to share only in exchange for peace. I offered a contact window and a promise. Come with your hands empty and your skills open. We will not turn away those who build with us. We will not bed down the raiders who only take. It was a complicated lie and a blunt truth wrapped together. The registry's commander nodded after the broadcast. That will slow the hopeful fools and weed out the violent ones, she said. The paradox of the climax is that the turning point was not a single, clean victory. The raiders had tested us and retreated for now, but the cost was there. A burst pipeline, 3 injured, and a week of lost filtration while the pumps were repaired. The dam would hold, but barely. The registry stayed a few days to help repair and to teach people how to camouflage heat signatures and reinforce intake lines. Mara joined their engineers, and Cade and his team worked through nights to keep the turbines churning. I lay awake that night in a cot that smelled faintly of oil and bread, thinking about the choice I had almost made to fake an incoming force, to lure predators away. I realized the only reasons I could have justified such a deception were the same reasons people had started to believe in myths, to buy time, to protect a fragile hope. Deception had a price. So did honesty. We'd chosen a path somewhere between. If the climax forced a choice, my reckoning was quieter and lonelier. I had to reconcile the voice I sold for canned milk with the man who held a child's hand in a broken world. I had to hold both the small economics of survival and the larger ethics of what we were rebuilding. The green line was not a miracle. It was a patchwork, a compromise, a community that might yet fail. But in its battered control room, lit by generator glow and hands working side by side, I heard a future possibility that sounded like a song. Mara came to my cot in the small hours. She sat, didn't speak for a long time, and then took my hand. "You did good," she said. "You kept the line open when we needed it." I thought of my daughter's laugh like a pressure in my chest and let myself believe, for the first time in a long time, that belief was not simply a bait to be taken. It was sometimes the very thing that kept us moving forward. Outside, under the black and faintly star-glittered sky, turbines turned. Water still flowed. The world was not fixed, but in the roar of the spillway I could hear a promise, fragile, conditional, and noisy as a newborn. After the raid, the camp smelled of burnt rubber and cold metal. The filtration shed looked like an open chest, pipes torn, valves mangled, a spray of oil frozen midair on the concrete. We spent the first day bandaging wounds and hauling broken parts into the workshops. The registry set up a triage tent, and Cade organized shifts. People moved with the slow, efficient economy of those who have known hunger so long they measure time by what they can fix in an hour. We lost men. We lost 3 that I counted by name, 2 to shrapnel, 1 to exposure when the secondary heater failed in the night. Names were said aloud at odd moments, then folded away, like paper boats put on a shelf. I wrote them in my logbook anyway, because writing a name is a way to keep someone from evaporating into the white. It's a small ritual, a stubborn insistence that someone existed and mattered. The turbines limped on. Cade and his crew cannibalized spare parts, housings from an old pump, a drive shaft jury-rigged from a suspended axle, and kept 2 turbines turning. The registry taught us how to camouflage heat signatures, how to run the intake lines through insulated conduits, how to stagger production so the plant never showed a single spike of output that would read like a beacon to anyone sweeping with thermal optics. The measures were crude and brilliant at once. Black tarps, snow berms, paint that absorbed light, and a protocol of silence on the radio for long stretches. We learned to speak in scheduled windows and codes. The broadcast I recorded in the control room was both medicine and tool. It slowed the flood of hopefuls who might otherwise have come with empty hands and full hearts, and it bought us time to rebuild. But the recording had other, less visible effects. A cluster of people who had been hiding in the woods took it as an invitation. They arrived with knives and meningitis, but also with knowledge of salvage and a makeshift still. They became part of the workforce. Another group, hardened, suspicious, interpreted the broadcast differently and set their eyes toward other targets. That is how Aftermath works here. Nothing unfolds like a neat moral play where right produces reward. Every action ripples in complicated ways. My voice saved some and painted a target on others. The weight of that ambivalence sits in my chest like ice. Mara stayed. She worked with the engineers at odd hours, sleeves rolled, hands black with grease. I watched her from the edge of the courtyard sometimes, how she moved like someone who had been baptized in cold and come out harder but not cruel. She was good at the work. She had a way of knowing which gaskets would expand in the heat and which would shatter in the cold. The registry took an interest in her. They valued practical skill. She accepted their apprenticeship with the quiet acceptance of someone who had seen what happened to those who hid their talents. Cade softened toward me in small increments. He'd been a man of hard edges, but the raid revealed cracks even in his armor. One night after repairs, he sat by the intake valve, smoking a cigarette stolen from some long-ago cache, and asked me to read from my logbook. He wanted the names. He wanted to hold them in the same human way we all did. It surprised me how much that asked of me, to be a record keeper, a ledger of memory. I complied. The act of reading names into the control room felt like an offering. Nature did not heal because we patched a pipe. The sky remained a matte white that flattened distance and depth. The periphery of the reservoir still carried sheets of blackened ice where soot and sediment had altered the surface. Moss and lichen had begun in odd, sheltered pockets where geothermal heat leaked through fissures, small green islands in a frozen sea. But they were exceptions, not trends. The planet's mechanisms were enormous and recalcitrant. Small human victories here were survival strategies, not reversals. Still, the dam's steady churn made a difference. Water that moved warmed the air in the immediate vicinity by fractions of degrees. Those fractions meant a longer season for the nursery, where a handful of women tried to coax sprouted seeds under lamps. They had a contraption of reflective shields and hand-cranked fans, and what looked like a dozen aerosol lamps scavenged from old greenhouses. Their first sprout, a fragile, pale shoot, was a miracle on a human scale. Small, stubborn, and entirely possible to kill by an ill-placed exhaust or a careless step. We protected it like the whole of civilization. My internal landscape shifted more than the world did. The choices I had made to broadcast, to risk, to climb toward the valve house, had consequences that were both immediate and subtle. I learned that leadership in this era isn't a title but a pattern of small, repeated acts. Calling for shifts, refusing to trade radio time to men who would weaponize it, forgiving the petty thefts born of desperation, and keeping the ledger. I became less certain of doctrinal truths and more interested in practical ethics. What actions did the least harm, and which ones rebuilt trust? Trust was the scarce commodity now, more valuable even than fuel. After the raid, trust became transactional. The registry's presence did something helpful. They brought a way to certify skill. If someone showed work for the turbines, the registry would mark their hand with a smear of paint, a crude badge that meant the person had contributed. It was a small thing, but symbols matter when reputations are fragile. Mara, with her grease-smeared hands, became marked, and that mark opened doors and closed others. People who had been anonymous were suddenly part of a network. That network would be the scaffolding for anything we might rebuild. I kept broadcasting, but my tone changed. The wild, unstructured monologues about summers and lost jokes gave more and more room to structured pieces. Scheduled windows for trade information, catalogs of equipment, lists of names, and practical how-tos. Once a day I read the logbook aloud: births, deaths, new arrivals, departures. Once a week I recorded a longer piece, a story from before, a song, a recipe. The narrative became part sermon and part public service announcement. It was a hybrid I had not planned for, but it fit the world we lived in. People responded, mostly with relief, a few with anger, some with nothing. Letters arrived scratched on metal plates, tied to poles, and left at the edge of the camp. A man left me a note about a child he had found and could not feed. A woman left a map of a place where a greenhouse still had a working bulb. These scraps of kindness and need formed a human geography of necessity and hope. But there are always limits. The damaged filtration line took 2 weeks to repair fully. For 2 weeks our output dropped, rationing tightened. Tempers flared. Some left. Some tried to take. The social contract is always under pressure here, and the moment of pressure tells you what it is made of. For the first time since the raid, I understood the brutal arithmetic of responsibility. You cannot save everyone. You can only try to keep a place where saving is possible. My greatest change was quieter, internal, and perhaps less measurable. I had been a man defined by voice, someone who used words to tether strangers to one another. After the raid, I began to think of voice as one tool among many. Action mattered too. I found myself crawling into intake shafts with the other technicians, my hands stained with oil, learning how the turbines breathed. There was an intimacy to machinery that I had not expected. The way a bearing murmured when it was healthy, the smell of hot bronze, the small, human satisfactions of aligning a seal. Doing physical work grounded me in a new way. It made the broadcasts more honest because I had turned a wrench for what I spoke about. Mara and I spoke less of destinations and more of maintenance. We talked about schedules and spare parts and who could be trusted with what. Our relationship was not a romance in any tidy sense. It was a covenant of survival. She trusted me with moments of silence. I trusted her with the throttle when I could not bear to be near the noise. We learned to share small comforts. A cup of soup, a story before a long night, the quiet companionship of two people who had both lost things that could never be returned. The world had not changed its mind. The freeze remained. The maps were still altered, but the human fabric around the dam, fragile, patched, humming, kept more people alive than it had a month earlier. For now, that had to be enough. At times I wonder about the people who left after hearing my broadcast. Did they find the warmer South Mara spoke of? Did the registry's patrols catch the raiders who had burned my shed? Did the rumor that the dam still breathed lead to salvation or to more blood? I don't know. My role is not to answer all those questions, but to keep asking them aloud so others can decide. In the evenings, when the turbines slow and the camp settles into a brittle kind of peace, I sit at the console and play a song. It's a short thing, 2 minutes of a summer I remember, something about a road trip and cheap beer and a girl who threw her hair back and laughed. I play it for no practical reason at all, except that it keeps us human. Children come to the windows and press their noses against the frost and listen. Adults stop repairing and look up. For a few minutes we are not ration lists and broken pipes. We are just listeners. That's the aftermath. Not a tidy ending, but a reshuffling of priorities. We have a place that will stay warm a little longer. We have a small, reproducible culture of work and care. We have people who still remember names. The world is not healed, but a circle of warmth persists long enough for seeds to be sprouted, and for a child to learn the feel of soil between fingers. I do not delude myself into thinking this will last forever. The dam can fail. A winter harsher than this one will come and test every seam. But right now, under the hum of turbines and the watchful eyes of men who have learned to look after one another, I can breathe without counting the minutes until the cold steel sensation. That is its own kind of miracle. So I keep the log. I keep the broadcasts. I keep working on pipes with my hands. The world is still terrible, but in this small patch the arithmetic tips for a while towards survival. If the dam teaches us anything, it is the old lesson. Moving water moves life. And if my voice helps keep that water guarded and the people around it fed and capable, then the cost of the choices I made at the valve house was at least partially redeemed. At night, when the wind writes its hard script across the snow, I whisper the names of those we lost. It is a private liturgy. It is also a promise. We will remember them. We will try. And as long as I have breath and a transmitter and hands that can still turn a wrench, I will do what I can to keep that promise. The camp settled into a rhythm that felt practical and precarious at once. Days were ledger entries. Who worked the intake, who kept the nursery lamps fed, who took the night watch while others slept. Nights were the confessional hours when the lost names came up again, not as statistics but as soft, private liturgies. I read some of those names on the air, out loud, not because it fixed anything, but because speech stitches absence to something larger than silence. Hope in this place is not cinematic. It doesn't swell with violins or demand banners. It arrives as a repaired gasket that holds another week of filtration, as a child who learns to cup a seed and coax a fragile green into a world that still insists on being brittle. Hope is a ration of biscuits shared without calculation, an extra hour of the generator so the hospital can run a lamp for a child's fever, the decision by a man like Cade to risk his convoy for parts. It's small and practical, and because of that, it is both fragile and real. I think a lot now about the trade-offs I made. At the valve house, I chose noise over silence, action over safety. That decision bought a handful of lives and opened a wound in our defenses. It taught me that moral clarity is an illusion when the world is a ledger of scarcity. We choose the smallest harm that lets the most people keep breathing. Sometimes that choice looks noble in the long view. Other times it just looks like survival. I can live with the ambiguity if I use it to build something that lasts longer than any one of my broadcasts. The Green Line is not a city of miracles. It is a scaffold, a temporary architecture of necessity. The turbines hum, and their sound is a kind of prayer. Water moves, and in moving, warms a little pocket of air and gives women in the nursery an extra degree to coax life. The registry patrols stayed for longer than anyone expected, teaching camouflage and tactics while also scanning for the raider bands that cropped up like sores. Mara's hands, once raw with cold and fury, learned the language of pumps and seals. She is good with small machinery the way others are good with words. I find myself less and less of a purely vocal man and more a hybrid, voice and wrench, radio and radiator. The cost remains. We buried 3 people under brittle white earth and named them in the log. We rationed tighter when the filtration hiccups. A winter wind last week brought with it a smell I remembered from another life's smoke, but not from a warm hearth. It was a chemical tang from some distant industrial grave. It reminded me the world can always find ways to hurt you anew. We are provisional here. Every fix is a bandage. That humility keeps us honest. What changed inside me is less dramatic than you might expect. The old Jonah, the sound engineer who fixed mixers for fun, who measured life in decibels and frequencies, is still here. But he is companion to something else, a ledger keeper, a small-town archivist of lives. I write names now not to catalog grief, but to resist erasure. I have learned that to broadcast a name is to refuse the whiteout of the world. I also learned to measure value differently. Years ago, value meant money, a paycheck, a plan. Now value is a skill that keeps a pump from seizing, a spare gasket, the ability to sharpen a blade, the patience to teach a child how to mend a cloth. We created a small economy that valued contribution above claim. It is an imperfect system. It excludes as much as it includes, but it has the modest virtue of being reproducible. That, in an age of collapse, is something close to salvation. There are nights when I still look at the photograph in my pocket, my daughter's grin frozen in a summer I cannot remember clearly anymore, and I let myself dissolve for a moment. Grief is a weather pattern that never entirely clears. It comes in fronts and then thins. But grief also reframes purpose. It is the reason I keep the log and radio and wrench. It is why I will spend an entire dark hour trenching a frozen pipe, so a mother 2 blocks over can boil water for a feverish infant. We talk sometimes about what comes next. No one expects a reversal of climate in their lifetime. Most of us have stopped waiting for the planet to fix what we broke. Instead, we plan for resilience, insulating intake lines better, training more hands, building seed banks with redundant heat sources, burying spare parts in caches, and marking them in a ledger that crosses many hands so theft becomes harder and sharing easier. We teach the children not just to survive the cold, but to understand the machinery of living in it. How to read a gauge, how to splice a wire, how to look at a sky and know when it will hurt you. My final message, the thing I try to shape every time I sit at the console and press the microphone to life, is a small, stubborn plea. Stay human. That sounds simple and sentimental, but in this arithmetic of scarcity, it is radical. Stay human means keep the records. Stay human means share what you can. Stay human means do not let the math of hunger turn you into a predator. Stay human means answer the voices that call, and also recognize when answering will do more harm than good. It's a messy ethic, full of exceptions and necessary cruelties, but at its root is a demand that we not let the cold strip us of our capacity for decency. So I broadcast practicalities in parables. I give out coordinates and repair tips, and I read names. I play a song now and then, something small and foolish from a world that smelled of summer. Children press their noses to the studio glass and watch. They will grow up with winter as their birthright. They will not know certain words the way we once did, but perhaps they will learn other ones. How to weld in snow, how to coax a sprout from a bulb in a lamp, how to keep a promise. Hope is fragile. It can be crushed by a convoy of raiders or by an unplanned thaw that floods a servo room. But it's also resilient in ways we do not always understand. A seed protected under a lamp will send its root down despite the long winter above. A community that keeps its log and teaches its children practical skills builds a low wall against oblivion, not a guarantee, but a margin for life. I don't know how long the green line will last. I don't know whether the registry's patrols will be enough to keep raiders at bay, or whether a harsher season will test our seals until they fail. All I know is this. For today, we have water. For today, a child learned to plant. For today, names are remembered. If you hear this, wherever you are tucked into some ruined building or walking a path with wind howling at your back, I want you to take one small thing from me. Find a person who knows how to fix something, a pump, a lamp, a wheel, and teach it to someone else. Keep your ledgers, mark your caches, share your food on the days you can, and when you can, speak. Our voices are a net. They catch the ones who fall. The snow will fall again. It will be indifferent to our choices. But as long as there are people who insist on tending the fragile things, seeds, names, songs, engines, then the world remains a place where someone might start a small, stubborn spring. This is Jonah Rays signing off for now. Keep the signal, keep the names, keep each other. Stay alive, stay human.